Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoy the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everyone. I'm conscious that it's a while since I did a personal story. The last one I did was when I talked about my time as Assistant Chief Defence Staff Operations and the Olympics and what we did in 2012. And I wanted to carry on the personal story theme because I'm kind of slightly conscious that I'm coming to the twilight of my career here in terms of the Air Force. It's been a journey. I've done a number of episodes, and rapidly I'm sort of looking at there aren't too many more to cover. But that leads me to some of the memories from some of these really significant tours, and I'm going to cover some more of that in some different episodes. But this time on this one, I specifically wanted to talk about some of the things that happened while I was the ACDS Ops, the Assistant Chief Defence Staff Operations, because it was momentous. I mean, it's no question for me. I mean, it was the highest rank I reached. It was a huge job in terms of challenge and everything else. And there are some bits that I still want to cover separately. I did the Olympics. That was in episode 112. If you haven't already listened to it, and it's worth probably a catch up on. And I'll talk separately about working in COBRA, the government's emergency machinery, because again, that's really interesting, and some of the stuff that happened there was fascinating as well. So within the bounds of what I can say, I'll talk a little bit about that on a different episode. But in the office, the tempo was relentless in this job. It was always very, very fraught, lots of things going on. There was never a dull moment. There were hundreds of emails a day coming into the office on various different systems with various different levels of classification, from extremely sensitive and extremely high classification down to relatively routine. But it wasn't all about being in the office. There was stuff that happened, both personally and professionally away from the office that was really memorable in this tour. And some of those bits I think are just worth some highlights, and I'll explain why when I get towards the end of the story. I mean, on the personal front, it was quite a big deal. I turned 50 when I was in this job, and that was a kind of when I look back and I was a 21-year-old on the front line out in Germany, did I ever think I was going to be 50? No, obviously none of us do. And you suddenly reach it and time marches on, and time marches on further since then, obviously. But that was quite significant. And we'd been building a house. I think that's worth an episode in its own right, actually, when I look back on that journey in building the house. So I probably will cover that separately. But we moved into the house in the very back end of 2011, just literally as I came back from America and into the ACDS Ops job. That was when the house was finished, and we moved into that. So the whole of the tour was kind of settling in that mode, and it was a little bit fraught because obviously the job was very busy. I was in a flat in London during the week, and often not entirely away from it at the weekend. So there was a bit of traveling backwards and forwards, and then when we were weekending to our new house, but it still was great. It was a new house. We built it. It was my 22nd move, would you believe, into the house of all the time I've been in the service, traveling around all the different places, and no surprise, therefore, that it was nice to be a bit stable. It was nice to finally think, right, we're going to be here, hopefully, for the long term. And to put down proper roots to get the place set up exactly as you want it, and focus on the garden and the internals and all those sorts of things as well. So away from the work environment, that was a great kind of distraction in some ways, and something to really focus on to make things move in the right direction from the house point of view. And on the work front, it was also really, really interesting because I did things that I'd never thought I was going to do. I went to South America. I'd never been to South America ever in my life. I've been around lots of the rest of the world, but South America had eluded me. I'd been to Belize in Central America, was the closest I'd got. And in this tour, I didn't go once, I went twice. It was amazing. And both in relatively quick succession, because the first trip was a bit longer. We went to Colombia and then on to Peru, very briefly to Peru, and then from there on to Brazil. And the focus of all of that was around counter narcotics and work with governments, out in South America and obviously officialdom out there to look at how we could link up with what the government was doing this end, and from a military point of view, where we could lend support, ideas, thoughts, just share information. And so there was a lot of that. And Colombia, I thought, was fascinating as a country. It was, brilliant. We were basically in a mixture between Bogota and Cartagena, and very, very well looked after by the defense attaché at the time, who was out there, and he was really kind. Took us around on the tour. It would have been lovely, as always with these things, to spend a bit more time there and actually see the country a bit more. But even then, we did see a fair bit just with what we did. Peru, a bit more limited. We were actually only there for a very, very short space of time and just in Lima. But it was crazy busy traffic. So the thing that I take away from that was absolutely extraordinary to reflect on what the traffic was like. And I thought I'd been in some pretty insane places in Europe, but Lima took the biscuit from that point of view. But we stayed there with the ambassador in his residence, and I remember hummingbirds in his garden. I mean, extraordinary, to see these kind of things that you see on TV, on wildlife shows, and so on. And actually, when you see them in the flesh, it's remarkable. And then from there on back through Bogota, actually, where we had to just use it as a hub, and then on to Brazil. And Brazil was again amazing, and the journey there was amazing, because when you leave Bogota, you're pretty immediately flying out over the Amazon, and the Amazon rainforest is just enormous. I mean, you seem to be flying over it for absolutely ages, and it makes you realize just the scale of some of these places that you look at on a map and you think, yeah, it looks quite big. Actually, when you get there, it's beyond big. It's just absolutely incredible to see it. And we went to Brasilia for a little bit, which was obviously Brazil's capital. We had some meetings there, and then to Rio. And Rio, again, vibrant, amazing city, incredible topography, very, very challenging, though. I have to say, of all the places I've visited, in a kind of non-operational capacity, then Brazil was probably one of the most challenging, just from a crime point of view, and feeling that you constantly had to be very, very vigilant with what you were doing. But it was still beautiful, and to go and see the Cristo Redeemer statue, and to go up the Sugarloaf and look at all those sites that are there, and just see and sort of sense that whole experience that is an incredible carnival town was amazing. And that was trip one. And trip two was just to Rio, because we went back there because of the Olympics, because obviously, having been so involved in the Olympics, there is a formal process where you hand on from one Olympic committee to the next one. And Rio was clearly the Games in 2016 that followed on from London. And we needed to go and do the best we could to hand over what we'd done to the Rio government and the Brazilian government generally, and the Rio organizing committee for their Olympic Games. And not to tell them how to do it, far from it, but to go and talk about, and particularly in the context of security, talk about what we had done and the challenges we had faced and the way we'd approached that. And I think it brings me to a kind of a point worthy of wider thought, because one of the things that happened during that was we talked an awful lot about our own security journey and some of the challenges we'd faced, obviously from the military side, in terms of what had happened with G4S not being there, and as the military having to step in a much bigger role. That was obviously part of it, but also the threats that we were guarding against and the things that we needed to face. And I can vividly remember the Rio authorities initially saying, yeah, but we don't have a terrorist problem. It's not an issue for us. And it was definitely a real kind of a work in progress, as it were. But even by the time we left, to turn around and say to them, look, it's not about you not having a terrorist problem yet. It's about the fact that everyone else potentially is going to be looking at you to make sure you've mitigated all risks of terrorism, because they sometimes do. And in many instances, the Olympics is a huge target. It's bringing the world to one location in a very highly focused way, with an enormous media coverage and etc. And that means you've got to pay an awful lot of attention to some of these threats that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about. And I think that they had to think about that quite hard and change their own dynamic, because that wasn't really what they were prepared for. And the point we were making to them is that if you don't provide the right level of reassurance and assurance that you are mitigating these threats. You've got a good process in place. You've got good security in place to be able to turn around and protect the athletes, the visitors, the general public, etc., that are coming from other countries to visit your country for the Olympic Games. Then it will affect what they do and how they approach it. So being really clear on that and being really confident, having a good plan that looks beyond your own borders and the typical threats you might or might not face was something that obviously was incredibly important to do. And I mean, obviously, it was also lovely to be back in Rio and with a great delegation and great fun because we had a much wider delegation on than just security. We clearly had the entire team of people involved, from the very senior ones, Lord Coe and Sir Philip Craven as the sort of the chair of LOCOG and the president of the IPC were out there. And I can still remember talking to Sir Philip Craven at a reception about the London Games and the Paralympic Games, where obviously it had been such an amazing result in terms of full stadia and all those sorts of things. And that was a great conversation because he was obviously immensely proud, rightly so, of everything that London had laid on. His concern, and I think sadly it's proved to be justified over the years, was that it was never going to get better than that. It was only going to go downhill, really, in terms of other countries' recognition, support, engagement with disabled athletes, and the approach to doing that. But it didn't take anything away from what was a fun event. It was great fun handover. It was a great opportunity to do stuff with a wider group of people, and to talk to people that I'd not had any contact with earlier on the Olympic Games stuff. We had the delivery committee people there who'd been there basically sorting the infrastructure and building all the event venues, etc. And some of the things they'd had to think about and the way they'd had to operate. All of that, the complexity of running that kind of thing suddenly became a bit clearer as you're sat there listening to what they say, just over a beer on the Copacabana, and so that was enormous fun. And talk about time away from the day job. I mean, that really was time away from the day job because it was kind of nothing to do with what I was normally doing in the office, and was just a hugely enjoyable event. The sort of more, I guess, mainstream away from the office activity was also really, really interesting there, though, in that role, because I went to a couple of major visits that I, again, never thought I was going to happen. The opportunity is clearly there. It's a joint job to link up with the other two services, to pay attention to what they're doing. I had a military assistant, and he was a Navy lieutenant commander, and actually then got promoted to full commander while he was working for me. And he was fantastic. Submariner, had formerly been a barrister actually before he joined the Navy. Didn't like being a barrister, so decided to join the Navy. Wanted to go into submarines, and he'd been on both attack submarines and also on the nuclear deterrent. And I remember saying to him in the office, I said, DJ, I've never actually been on a submarine, and when it's been alongside and had a look in and seen what it looks like, but I've never been out on the water, or underwater in particular on a submarine. Is that something that you think is possible at any point? And he said, leave it with me, sir. And the next thing I kind of envisaged, we were going to go to Devonport or maybe Faslane, but more likely Devonport, and go out on a day trip or something in a submarine when they were doing an exercise out as part of the Royal Navy sort of routine activity. And the next thing is this plan appears where actually I'm heading off with the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Mark Stanhope at the time, to go initially to Southern Command in the United States in Florida, which was more in my lane, really, because that was back on the kind of counter-narcotics type stuff. But then we flew from there to the Bahamas and to Ortec, to the ranges in Ortec. And we didn't get to enjoy the Bahamas at all because we were there all too briefly for that. But what we did do was go on HMS Astute, which is the current hunter-killer class of submarine that the Royal Navy operates. And at that stage, back in 2012, this was a brand new submarine, and it was doing trials against a fully worked up US attack submarine in the range in Ortec. And so we, had meetings with the team. It was actually the First Sea Lord was there with the Chief of Naval Operations from the United States Navy, Admiral Greenett. And we obviously had some quite constructive conversations on land. And then we went out to the two separate submarines. And initially, the two four-star admirals were on their own submarine, seeing what went on and watching the way that the operation unfolded and the exercise unfolded. But then they swapped. We surfaced partway through. They did a transfer and they moved the first Sea Lord across to USS New Mexico, and Admiral Greenett came on board HMS Astute. I stayed on Astute throughout. We basically had 24 hours on the submarine, which was just extraordinary. It was an extraordinary experience to see the way that breed of sailors operate within the Royal Navy and what they do, how they how they function. And I mean, I came away with nothing but admiration for it. Totally different to the world that I'd been in virtually my whole career, where we're rushing around at 0.6 at very high speed, but with a view out the window. These guys are moving very slowly because they want to be super stealthy and very, very quiet. But they've also got no visibility. They've got sonar, and that's it. And interpreting the sonar display was black magic, as far as I was concerned. It was just real witchcraft. I could not could even after a number of sessions of talking about this is what it looks like, this is what you're seeing, this is it, and I'm going, no, I don't get this at all. And equally, walking, full tour of the submarine, going down, standing on top of a nuclear reactor, looking down into the reactor, being reassured that no, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. You're not going to get irradiated standing here. That was an experience that I'd never had before, and the patience and attitude of the crew on a submarine like that, where for a lot of them, they're working, particularly the ones that, for example, monitor the nuclear reactor and work on the engineering side. Then a lot of their job is actually monitoring, ensuring, checking, and basically hoping nothing goes wrong. But the captain of HMS Astute at this particular time had previously been the captain of one of the Trafalgar class submarines that had an explosion under the ice in the Arctic, and there were casualties from that. But you can imagine the drama. You've got an explosion underwater. You have no ascent to the surface possible because you're underneath the ice cap, and you're having to manage that. And so your ability to go from kind of completely calm, moving through, moving very slowly, moving very steadily, just monitoring systems, everything's running normally, to being into full response mode without going into panic mode, and actually just get the job done to sort the problem out and make sure everything's fine. That's a real skill, and it was amazing to watch these individuals as they did it, and their kind of temperament to be able to operate, not knowing where they were the vast majority of the time, apart from obviously a very specific number of the crew who do, and that's again challenging, and it was just really, really insightful to do that. I was quite glad I was there on the day I was, when we were doing essentially maneuvers against the American submarine. And the nearest I can equate to that is when we did air-to-air combat in the Air Force. You've got a closing speed as you turn in for the kind of initial crossing maneuver, head-to-head. So you actually you start on an even keel, as it were, and then the object is to get on the other guy's tail. And you're closing at about 1,000 knots, so over 1,000 miles an hour typically. In the submarine, we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it with a closing speed probably of about 4. But you can't see anything, and these are big things, and they don't easily maneuver under the water. So there were some real challenges to turn around and make sure you mitigated all of that. But again, really amazing to watch the way they functioned. But what they also said to me was the next day, they were actually going out to do trials on deep trials, and obviously the classification is very high in terms of depth that submarines go to. And I'm not going to get into any of that. But what the crew was saying is, it's always interesting because we've not done that yet, so we'll see how much it leaks. What do you mean it leaks? I said, oh yeah, they all leak. I was going, okay, I'm really glad that I'm here today and not tomorrow, because that, I think, would have freaked me out a little bit if we're sitting there and the submarine starts leaking. But incredible insight to see that world in a way that I hadn't. And again, all from a relative chance conversation with a fantastically capable military assistant, DJ Turner, who tragically is no longer with us. He was taken far, far too early with bowel cancer, leaving behind a young family and two children, which was utterly tragic. And I miss him dearly because he was a super, super guy. But I also then did another submarine experience, which is another of my kind of memories on this journey, where the Vanguard boats that deliver the nuclear deterrent to the Navy and to the country are out on patrol constantly. They've been doing that for decades, continuous sea deterrent, and there's always a boat out there, always armed, always ready, doing what nuclear deterrence is all about. And when they return from patrol, then what they try and do is they'll have a quote VIP unquote, which technically I fitted those criteria as a two-star officer in the Air Force, would go and welcome them back and be part of that kind of return to harbour routine that they have. And I had the opportunity to go and do that with HMS Victorious, and that was an absolutely fascinating visit because it's a world where obviously most people never get to see inside that at all. You know very, very little about it, other than the fact it exists potentially. There's really nothing else you're going to find out about it. So to go and do it and actually see the security operation around it that actually protects the deterrent boats as they're going out to sea and coming back from the sea, because clearly there are risks there on on not least on the protester side, but actually also on wider, more kind of significant risks. That was impressive to see that. But then on the submarine itself, huge submarine, totally different class of submarine, obviously with Trident nuclear missiles on it, and visit the up and down the boat, go and have a look at the all of the kind of facilities they've got. Have breakfast with the officers, which was fabulous and great fun to do, and then listen to the debrief from the whole patrol. Which was with a whole load of technical specialists from the Royal Navy and from some of the support side, to listen about the submarine and the issues they'd had with the submarine, to what they'd encountered, where they'd actually been, what they'd done. Utterly fascinating, of course, and a whole new level of acronyms. I thought the Air Force was good on three-letter acronyms, but the Navy specialize in it in that world, that's for sure. And so understanding the briefing was one of the challenges. But again, huge insight into an area of defense that I had no previous real experience in at all. I'd done the nuclear role years before myself when we were doing airborne nuclear deterrent, but not seen the submarine side. But the bit I wanted to finish with on that visit was amazing, because one of the things I also was asked to do was present medals, dolphins, the dolphin badge that submariners wear, their equivalent of pilot's wings, if you like, and deterrent pins to the crew. Now, the deterrent pin is a fairly innocuous, ordinary-looking pin, double-ended pin that they wear, and it signifies what they do and they kind of their dedication to the task, I guess. And when you do your first patrol, you get a steel pin, which is again, it's a reasonable length, probably a couple of inches long pin with a double-ended head on it that you can wear with your dolphins that denotes that. When you've done 25 patrols, you get a gold pin. Now, I presented on this particular day 3 gold deterrent pins. So just think about that for a minute. You've got 3 people on that submarine who've spent 25 times minimum 3 months underwater on patrol, protecting our country. Quite an extraordinary level of commitment. That is years underwater, doing a job that is often with minimal recognition. They can't really talk about it, with minimal thanks. And that is loyalty and dedication beyond the pale. So it was fabulous to be there and be able to turn around and congratulate them, celebrate with them a little bit, and just recognize them for the extraordinary achievement that they have. As I reflect back on what's my 34 and a half years of military service, ultimately, it's these memories, and there are others, from earlier tours. And I'll probably pull together some other episodes that pull out some of those. That's what I look back on now, because the memories matter. I count myself incredibly lucky to have had so many extraordinary opportunities over the years and been to some wonderful places, done some amazing things. done some not so amazing things in some quite difficult places. And that's just as important to have some of those memories as well. But I think the point I want to leave you with, and I kind of always try and hook something into what's relevant to you here, is that people very often focus on saying, right, you got to look forward, don't look back, keep focus forward. And I actually subscribe to that in large part. I'm very much a forward-looking person. I don't dwell on particularly things that haven't gone so well in the past. But equally, as you look back over what you've done, whether it's personal stuff, whether it's professional stuff, having some of those memories that you can hook into, the key memories that really matter, the things that you've done, the people you've met, the places you've been, these are all things that absolutely make you a unique human being and give you your own set of personalized experiences that you can dwell on, dine out on, talk about, hang pictures on the walls of things you've done. But I think it's worth just taking some of the time, to look back, reflect, and actually think about, what have I achieved, particularly in perhaps your darker moments, times when you're frustrated about things that you've actually done, the achievements you've made, and so on and so forth. I think if you look back in your life, you'll find there are plenty of things, whether it is personal or professional, that actually you should be pretty proud of in most instances. So just have that look back occasionally. You might find it surprises you, because it's a good thing to do. That's all I wanted to say this week. Again, personal stories are one of the things I really love doing. I'm fast thinking about how I go from beyond the Air Force career, which is coming up with a tour left to do, and into some other things. But I'm sure there'll be other things I can illuminate you with over the time. Next week's back to guests, so I'm looking forward to that. I really hope that you found this interesting, and maybe one or two bits of it just useful and give you a little bit to reflect on. As I always say, please give me some feedback. Please do share this widely, post it on, boost the podcast, do everything you can to help with that. If you found it valuable, if you continue to find what I say valuable and what my guests say valuable, then do think about that, giving back some value and joining the podcast as a financial supporter via Patreon or via the support the show link in your podcast platform. You can do that for very little money, and you can make a very big difference to what this is all about. So that would be hugely appreciated if you're up for that. If you're thinking about it and going, actually, do you know what? I'm just enjoying listening to it for free. That's okay. That's fine. But do consider the fact that it takes time and effort to produce it. And if you're happy to give me some support for that, I would really, really be grateful. Just think of it as buying me a beer or a cup of coffee. That would be just as good. But I'll see you again next week with another great episode. Until then, bye for now.